Patient Margaret Ault, 71. Presenting complaint: unexplained weight loss, progressive. Current measured weight at intake: 9 pounds. Patient appears full-sized, ambulatory, conversational. Alert and oriented times 4, 9 pounds. I wrote that on my first day at the Clarita Basin clinic, and I did not believe what I had written. I asked Margaret to step off the scale. I recalibrated it. I asked her to step back on. 9 pounds. I picked up a 20-pound bag of saline from the supply shelf and placed it on the scale beside her. The readout climbed to 29. I removed the saline. 9. Margaret watched me with the patient kindness of someone who has seen this ritual performed before, and she said, "It's all right, honey. It does that." I wrote a second line in the chart: "Scale may require service." Then I looked at Margaret's arm resting on the exam table, and through the skin of her inner wrist I could see not veins, not the blue-green trace of superficial vasculature. I could see the texture of the vinyl beneath her arm, the weave of the upholstery visible through her flesh the way light passes through a held photograph. I closed the chart. I opened it again. I wrote nothing else. My name is Joanna Ault. I am a traveling nurse. I have worked in 11 states in 9 years, mostly rural placements, mostly clinics that cannot keep permanent staff because the pay is too low and the hours are too long and the nearest hospital is 2 counties away. I took the Clarita Basin assignment because it was available and because I had not stopped working since Albuquerque, and because if I stopped working, I would have to sit still, and if I sat still, I would have to think about what happened at Presbyterian, and I was not ready to do that. I am still not ready to do that. I carried something with me when I drove south on I-25 and then west on 60, and then onto a road that did not appear on the GPS and that turned to gravel after 11 miles, and that ended at a town I could not find on any map printed after 2014. A patient chart in a manila folder in the outside pocket of my nursing bag. I could feel its edge against my hip every time I shifted in the driver's seat. I have felt its edge against my hip every day for 3 years. I did not bring it because I needed it. I brought it because I have never been able to set it down. Clarita Basin, New Mexico. Population somewhere between 40 and 60 depending on who you asked and when you asked them. 1 clinic, 1 gas station that also served as the post office. A small grocery. A scatter of adobe houses, low-roofed, sun-cracked. The color of everything here: pale tan, bleeding into pale white, bleeding into the blinding nothing of the sky. And light everywhere. Light so constant and so absolute that the first thing I noticed when I stepped out of my car at 11 in the morning was not the heat and not the silence. It was the ground beneath my feet. Bright, evenly lit, no variation in shade, no dark shape extending from my shoes, no silhouette of my body stretched across the gravel. I was not casting a shadow. I looked at the clinic, a single-story building, whitewashed with a rusted tin roof. No shadow along its base. I looked at the gas station. No shadow beneath its overhang. I looked at the single juniper that stood crooked near the clinic entrance, its branches spread like fingers. Full sun, directly overhead, and beneath the juniper nothing, just more bright ground, the same pale dust, uninterrupted, as though the tree were not there at all. I told myself it was the angle. The sun was nearly at zenith. Desert, midsummer, shadows would be minimal. I told myself this, and I walked into the clinic and I met the woman I was replacing, and she told me something that I have not been able to unhear since. Her name was Dana Reeves. She was mid-50s, already packed, her car loaded with boxes visible through the clinic's front window. She did not sit down. She handed me a single page, a typed memo, clinical formatting, no header, no signature block, just text. "Handoff notes," she said. "Everything medical is in the filing cabinet, alphabetical. The important stuff is on that page." I looked at the memo. It contained 3 lines. All outdoor work must end by 4 p.m. No exceptions. The clinic's west-facing windows are sealed for a reason. Do not open or unblock them. If your shadow does not move when you move, walk into the nearest building. Do not run. Running makes it certain. I read it twice. I looked up at Dana. She was already holding her keys. I don't understand what this means, I said. You will. She paused at the door. The patients are good people. Most of them have been here their whole lives. They will not explain it to you because they don't explain it to themselves. They just do what they do. Watch them. Watch carefully. And stay inside after sundown. She left. I heard her car start. I heard the gravel crunch as she pulled away, and through the open front door I watched her drive east on the single road, and I noticed in the hard noon light that her tires did not darken the ground behind them. No shadow trailed beneath the chassis. The car moved through the light as though the light refused to acknowledge it. I spent my first 3 days doing what traveling nurses do. I inventoried the supply room. I reviewed patient charts. I introduced myself at the grocery, at the gas station, at the 2 nearest houses. People were polite, warm even. A woman named Dolores Reyna brought me a foil-wrapped plate of enchiladas and told me the clinic's water heater needed 20 minutes to warm up and that the filing cabinet's 3rd drawer stuck unless you lifted it slightly while pulling. Practical things, kind things. No one mentioned shadows. But I watched the way Dana had told me to, and what I saw was a town organized entirely around the behavior of light. Every house faced east. Every porch was on the eastern side. The clinic's west wall had 2 window frames that had been filled with cinder block and plastered over. From outside, you could still see the outlines. From inside, they were just blank wall. No one worked outside past 4. By 3:30, tools were put away, hoses coiled, clotheslines emptied. By 4, the streets were bare. By 4:30, shutters closed on every west-facing window, though most houses had been built with few or no windows on that side to begin with. And at noon, when the sun was highest, nothing in Clarita Basin cast a shadow. I stood outside the clinic at 12:15 on my 2nd day and looked down at my feet, and there was nothing, just dust, pale and unbroken, as though I were standing on a photograph of the ground rather than the ground itself. I wrote it down. No observable shadows at solar noon. Consistent across structures, vegetation, and persons. I wrote clinical language around an impossible observation because that is how I hold myself together. It is the only tool I have ever trusted completely. That and the chart in my bag, whose edge I touched without thinking as I clicked the pen shut. On the 4th day, I drove to Margaret Ouellette's house. She lived in a small adobe at the eastern edge of town, 2 rooms, a kitchen with a window that faced the sunrise. She let me in and offered me coffee, and I sat at her table, and I asked her as carefully as I knew how about the shadows. She sipped her coffee. She set the cup down. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has just asked the question you have been waiting for. How much did Dana tell you? Almost nothing, Margaret nodded. That's right. That's how it works. You can't be told the whole thing. You have to see it first or the telling doesn't take. She turned her cup in her hands. I've lived here 61 years. I was born in this house. My mother was born in this house. The shadows have always been wrong here. I don't mean the extra ones, I mean all of them. Nothing in this basin casts right. Hasn't since before anyone alive can remember. Since when? Since before, the old families, the ones who built the first houses, they figured out the schedule. Sun's high, you're fine. Nothing out there but light. But when the angle drops, when the sun gets low enough that shadows should be longest, that's when they come. Come from where? From the people they used to belong to. She said it the way she might have said the school bus comes at 7:15, a fact of the local schedule. Every person here, every building, every fence post we don't cast. You've seen that. What you haven't seen yet is what happens when the light goes low and the ones that should be ours come back. Not to us. Not attached. On their own. She told me about the habits, the east-facing construction, the sealed west windows, coming inside by 4. She told me about the schedule. Safe at noon, cautious by 3, inside by 4, shuttered by 5. Don't look west after sundown. She told me these things the way a school teacher organizes a lesson for a student who needs the information quickly and cannot afford to be confused. But when I asked her what happened when one of the extra shadows attached to a person, what the weight loss meant, what the translucence was, she went quiet. She looked at her hands on the table. her fingertips translucent at the tips, the nail beds visible from both sides like frosted glass. "You'll see," she said. "You'll see it in the charts. Dana kept good charts. If you've listened this far, you're inside it now, the same way I was. Stay with me." I hadn't found Dana's chart yet. Margaret told me to read the charts. So that evening, I went back to the clinic and I opened the third drawer, lifting it slightly while pulling, and I read them the way a nurse reads charts when she knows something is wrong and the diagnosis is hiding in the numbers. There were 41 active files. 31 contained the same note in the vital section where weight should be recorded, written in different hands across years of documentation. See attached. No change. Most of the attachments were missing, but in 7 charts, the weight log was still clipped to the inside back cover, dates down the left side, weights on the right, and in every case the weights decreased. A pound every few months, sometimes a pound a year, always downward, never a gain, never a plateau. Margaret's chart. Starting weight in 2006, 144 pounds. Last recorded weight before my intake, 14 pounds. And when I had weighed her that morning, 9. Pio Estrada's chart showed the same slope, 171 to 83 across 14 years, and after what I would see his left arm become 2 days later, I understood what those missing pounds looked like from the inside. I sat at the desk reading these numbers, and the bar of light from the east window lay across my hand, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw the wood grain of the desk surface through my index finger. I held my hand up. It looked solid. I pressed it flat against the page and felt the paper and told myself it was the light, just the light. But I touched the chart in my bag on the way out, the way you touch a railing when the floor feels unsteady. Margaret had told me the what. The charts were showing me the how. What I did not yet understand was the why. That understanding came later, and it cost me. On the 6th day, I was drawing blood from Pio Estrada for a routine panel when the needle passed through his arm. Not through the vein, through the arm. I had the tourniquet on. I had palpated the antecubital vein. I had the needle at the correct angle, 15 degrees, bevel up, standard venipuncture. The needle entered the skin. I felt the faint pop of the vein wall, and then the resistance vanished. The needle continued forward as though the tissue beneath the skin had simply stopped being there. It passed through his forearm and emerged from the other side, the tip visible below his elbow, bright with a single drop of blood that looked too thin, too translucent, more like tinted water than whole blood. Pio looked at the needle passing through his arm. He looked at me. He said, "Try the other arm. The left one's been like that since March." I withdrew the needle. I swabbed both entry points. There was almost no bleeding, just a faint dampness that evaporated before I could blot it. I moved to his right arm. The draw was successful, though the blood that filled the tube was pale, dilute, the color of rose, rather than the dark Venus red it should have been. I labeled the tube, and in the margin of his chart, in handwriting I kept deliberately steady, I wrote, "Right arm viable for venipuncture. Left arm, needle passes through tissue without resistance. No hematoma. No pain response. Patient reports onset approximately 3 months ago." I did not write what I was thinking, which was that Pio Estrada's left arm was becoming theoretical. It looked like an arm. It moved like an arm. But it was no longer an arm in any way that mattered to a needle or a blood pressure cuff or the laws of physics. It was a memory of an arm still being worn. 83 pounds, and some of those pounds were in places the scale could find, and some were in places that had already stopped being findable. On the 9th morning, I almost died, or almost stopped, or almost became something that could no longer tell the difference. I had been reorganizing the supply room, a task I had assigned myself because it was concrete and countable and did not require me to think about what I had seen in Pio's arm. I lost track of time. When I stepped outside to carry a box of expired gauze to the waste bin behind the clinic, the light had changed. It was amber, low. The sun was a hand's width above the western horizon. It was 5:10. I was standing on the west side of the building, behind the clinic, facing the open desert, with nothing between me and the sunset but 40 feet of bare ground. And on that ground, between me and the waste bin, between me and the corner of the building, between me and the east-facing door, there were shadows. 7 of them. long, dark, sharp-edged on the pale dust. They were simply there, stretched across the ground like 7 people lying on their backs with their arms at their sides, their head shapes pointed toward me. I froze. The box of gauze was in my hands. The clinic's back door was 12 feet behind me. Dana's memo cycled through my mind. Walk into the nearest building. Do not run. Running makes it certain. I took a step backward, toward the door, slow, controlled. The way you move in a code when the patient is crashing and the only thing keeping your hands useful is the protocol you learned so deeply it replaced your panic. One of the shadows moved, not all of it, just the hand shape. The fingers of the silhouette closest to my feet spread open on the dust, 5 dark points fanning outward, and then the hand shape slid forward, toward my shoe. 3 inches. 5. The tips of the finger shapes reached the toe of my left boot, and I felt cold. Not air cold, not wind. A cold that started in the sole of my foot and climbed my ankle and shin like water filling a boot. A cold so precise I could feel its edge a line across my calf, rising, marking the exact boundary between the part of me that was still warm and the part that had been touched. I took another step back. The cold stopped climbing but did not recede. My left leg from the knee down felt like it belonged to someone else, not numb, not painful, just absent, disconnected from the signals my brain was sending it. I could see my leg. I could see my foot in its boot on the ground. But the sensation of standing on it was gone, replaced by a silence where feeling should have been. I took a third step, a fourth. My back touched the clinic door. I reached behind me, found the handle, pushed it open, and stepped inside. The door closed. The cold began to fade slowly, like circulation returning to a compressed limb. It took 4 minutes. I timed it, sitting on the floor of the supply room with my back against the east wall, my left hand pressed to my left shin, waiting to feel my own leg again. When the sensation returned, I pulled up my pant leg. The skin from my knee to my ankle was faintly gray, not bruised, not discolored the way skin discolors from cold exposure. Gray the way the wall had been gray when I had touched it on my first night, an ashen residue that sat on the surface for a moment and then sank in, absorbed, gone, leaving the skin looking normal but feeling 1 degree less present than it had before. The next morning I looked at my shin in the bathroom light. The skin appeared fine, but when I held my leg against the white tile of the clinic floor, I could see faintly for just a moment before my eyes adjusted, or my mind refused the grout lines of the tile visible through the skin. A faint grid, barely there, like a watermark in paper. Then it was gone, or I stopped being able to see it. I am not sure those are different things. I went to the scale. 124 pounds. I had weighed 131 at the start of the assignment, 7 pounds in 9 days. Something about being new here, about the shadow being freshly separated, made the subtraction faster. Dana's rate had been 2 pounds a year. Mine was nearly a pound a day. I stepped off the scale. I put my hand in my bag and I found the edge of the chart, his chart, the one I carried, the one I could not put down, and I held it between my fingers and I felt its weight. Cardboard and paper and a metal clip. A few ounces that meant more to me than the 7 pounds I had lost because those ounces were chosen, were carried, were a decision I made every morning when I picked up the bag. The 7 pounds were taken. I did not understand yet why that distinction mattered. I would. Soon. On the 12th night, I heard the almost voice clearly for the first time. I had been sitting at the clinic desk after sundown, writing chart notes by the light of the east-facing desk lamp, when the cold began to spread through the west wall. I had felt it before, the slow chill that announced the shadow's arrival each evening. But this night, it was different, stronger, more focused. The cold concentrated in a single patch of wall directly behind my chair, a circle perhaps a foot in diameter, and from inside that circle came a vibration. Not a sound, a vibration. I felt it in the back of my skull before I heard it in my ears, a low rhythmic pulse but wrong, too slow. 1 beat every 4 seconds, then every 5, then every 7, the interval stretching as though whatever was producing it was trying to match a rhythm it could not quite remember. And I recognized the cadence. Not immediately, not consciously. My hands recognized at first my hands, which pressed flat against the desk and began to tense in a rhythm I had not performed in 3 years. Push, release, push, release. 120 compressions per minute is the protocol. What I was hearing through the wall was that rhythm slowed to a crawl, distorted, stretched out the way a recording stretches when the playback speed drops the tempo of a chest compression performed by something that had never had hands but had somehow learned the pattern, had pulled it from the air or from the dust or from me. I leaned closer to the wall. The cold intensified. My ear was 6 inches from the surface. 4, 2. Beneath the rhythm, almost below the threshold of perception, there was something else. A shape inside the vibration, not a word, not language, but the architecture of a voice forming a sound that had meaning once and that was trying, from the other side of a cinderblock wall, to have meaning again. A syllable spoken by a voice that had once been able to say other things, a whole life's worth of other things, and now had only this one shape left, offered through stone like a hand extended through a mail slot. I pulled back. The vibration continued for another 30 seconds, the compression rhythm slowing, stretching, until the intervals between beats were so long that each one felt like the last. Then it stopped. The cold receded. The wall was just a wall again. I sat at the desk and I wrote in my composition book, "The shadows are learning." On night 1, they pressed against the wall. On night 8, one of them stood. Tonight, one of them found a rhythm it shouldn't know. The progression is not random. They are building towards something. A progressive condition requires progressive documentation. I do not look away. On the 13th day, I sat with Dolores Reina in her kitchen while she made tamales and told me about her daughter in Las Cruces who called every Sunday and who did not know what was happening to her mother and must never know. And Dolores told me about a woman named Pilar. Pilar had lived on the south edge of town. She had been the fastest runner in Clarita Basin when she was young. One evening in 2016, she had been caught outside at sunset. She had seen a shadow slide toward her, and she had done what every instinct told her to do. She ran. The shadow matched her, Dolores said, her hand still working the mesa. Step for step, and then it was ahead of her, and then it was under her, not beside her under her feet like she was casting it, except it wasn't hers. It was wearing her shape, running with her legs, and every step she took she was lighter. You could see it from the porches. She was flickering, like a candle in a draft. 15 steps, maybe 20. Then her foot came down and didn't land. Went through the ground. Her next step, same thing. She was running on nothing. Running in the air an inch above the dust because her body didn't have enough weight left to touch the earth. What happened to her? Dolores pressed the mesa flat. The sun set, and when the light was gone, so was she. There was nothing on the road, not even the shadow. It took everything. Running gives them everything at once. Walking, you can survive. Walking just gives them a little. Dana's memo, do not run. Running makes it certain, not a rule to protect you, a rate equation. Walking gives them a fraction. Running gives them the whole sum. On the 15th day, I opened the oldest chart in the filing cabinet. It was filed at the very back of the 3rd drawer, behind a divider labeled inactive. The chart was for a patient named Dana Reeves, not the Dana Reeves who had handed me the memo and driven away. A different Dana Reeves, same name. The chart was dated 1991. The patient was listed as a traveling nurse, temporary assignment, Clarita Basin Clinic. The intake notes were thorough blood pressure, heart rate, respiratory rate, all normal. Weight, 138 pounds. The handwriting was small, precise, and familiar. I compared it to the memo that had been left for me. It was the same hand. Dana had written her own intake chart, 33 years ago. I flipped forward through the pages. The weight log ran from 1991 to 2024. 138, 136, 131. Descending, year by year, pound by pound, the same slow subtraction I had seen in every other chart. The final entry, dated 4 months before I arrived, read 61 pounds, ambulatory, functional, departure approved. She had not left because her rotation ended. She had left because she was running out, and her rate 77 pounds in 33 years was the slowest in the entire cabinet. Slower than Pio, slower than Margaret, slower than anyone born here. Something had been protecting her, something she carried that weighed more than the shadows could subtract. I turned to the last page. There, on the inside back cover, in tiny letters, written as though she had pressed the pen to paper in the dark, it anchors to what you've let go of. The ones who keep their shadows longest are the ones who hold on hardest. Not to places, not to people, to the thing they can't put down. The grief you carry is heavier than your body. That's the only weight it cannot subtract. I read that sentence 4 times. Then I opened my bag and I took out the chart I had never filed, never submitted, never released. The chart I had carried in 11 states across 9 years, whose edge I felt against my hip every day, whose weight I knew by touch the way you know the weight of a key you have carried so long it has become part of your hand. The chart of a patient named Thomas Delgado, room 412, Presbyterian Hospital, Albuquerque. He was 44. He had come in for a cardiac arrhythmia that should have been manageable. He died because the crash cart was on the wrong floor, and by the time it arrived, his heart had been stopped for 9 minutes. I did compressions for all 9 of those minutes. My arms ached for a week afterward. He died with my hand on his chest and his eyes on my face, and the last thing he said was thank you. And I have carried his chart in my bag every day since, because putting it down would mean it was over, and if it was over, then I had failed, and the failure was permanent, and the grief was the only proof I had left that I had tried. His chart had his vitals, his history, his medication list, and my handwritten note at the end. I am sorry. I am sorry. I am sorry. I had never told anyone about that chart. It was the heaviest thing I owned, and I do not mean that as metaphor. Dana's note told me what the charts and the numbers had been circling. Grief that has become so structural that removing it would be the same as removing a wall that was the only weight the shadows could not subtract. The people who faded fastest were the ones who had made peace, who had set their burdens down. The ones who lasted were the ones who held on, who carried their dead and their guilt like stones in their pockets and would not put them down for anything. I sat with Margaret on her porch the next afternoon and listened to her talk about her late husband, Ernesto, who had died in this house in 2011, weighing 11 pounds. He held my hand at the end, she said, both of his around one of mine. 11 pounds of man, and I could still feel every finger. He pressed like he was trying to leave a print of himself on my bones, so I'd carry the shape of his grip after the rest of him was gone. She looked at her translucent fingertips. I do. I still carry it. I sat with Dolores again and watched her hands work the mesa with the particular concentration of a woman whose daughter must never know. I learned the weight of this town, not the weight on the scales, the other weight, the held weight, the grief and the love and the refusal to let go that kept these people solid enough to still be here after decades of subtraction. And on my last night, I made a decision. I took Tomas Delgado's chart out of my bag. I sat at the clinic desk. I opened it to the last page where I had written, I am sorry 3 times in handwriting that shook. And below it, in steady letters, I wrote what I should have written 3 years ago. Thomas Delgado died at 11:47 p.m. on March 14th. Cause of death, ventricular fibrillation complicated by delayed defibrillation due to equipment misplacement on an adjacent floor. Attending nurse performed manual CPR for 9 minutes without interruption. Resuscitation efforts were appropriate, timely, and sustained. Patient was not failed. Equipment was not present. The nurse did everything that could be done. This chart is now complete. I closed the chart. I put it in the filing cabinet's 3rd drawer behind the inactive divider next to Dana's chart. I let go of it. I felt my fingers release the cardboard edge. I felt the drawer close, and I felt myself get lighter. Not metaphorically, physically. The chair beneath me became uncertain, not gone, but conditional, as though the chair were deciding moment by moment whether to hold me. My feet on the floor felt the same way, present, then questionable, then present again, a stutter in the contract between my body and the ground. The pen on the desk rolled toward my hand, and when I reached for it, my fingers closed around it and then closed through it. My thumb and forefinger passing through the barrel the way P.O.'s left arm had let the needle through. No resistance, no pain, just a sudden and absolute absence of substance where substance had been. I stood up. The act of standing felt like a negotiation. My legs held, but they held the way a frayed rope holds technically temporarily, with the constant implication that the next second might be different. I walked to the window. In the glass, I could see my reflection, and through my reflection, I could see the wall behind me. Not faintly, clearly. The cracks in the plaster, the edge of the filing cabinet, the clock on the wall whose face was visible through my chest. I was becoming a window, a pane of glass in the shape of a woman, still standing, still breathing. But the breathing was thinner now, less a movement of air and more a memory of the movement of air. I could feel the subtraction accelerating. The grief had been the ballast, the keel weight that kept me upright in the current, and I had pulled it out and filed it in a drawer, and the current was taking me now at the speed of surrender. The floor was less certain under each step. The light from the desk lamp passed through my hand, and I could see on the wall beyond the shadow of my bones, the dense remnants the light could still not fully penetrate, the last architecture of a body that was forgetting it was a body. And through the skin of my forearm, faintly, the tile pattern of the clinic floor, the same grout lines I had seen through my shin on the morning after the shadow touched me, except now they were everywhere, as though the building were rising up through me to fill the space I was leaving behind. And in the glass of the window, behind my transparent reflection, I saw a shape, standing where I was standing, occupying the space my body was vacating. A dark silhouette, my height, my outline, my shoulders and my arms, but solid where I was becoming glass. It was inside my reflection. Inside me, waiting in the space between my fading substance the way a tenant waits in a hallway for the previous occupant to finish leaving. As I watched, its hand lifted slowly, deliberately reaching toward the inner surface of the glass from my side. From inside the body, I was emptying. I walked to the filing cabinet. Every step was an act of will. I could feel the floor through my shoes, but the feeling was abstract, a concept rather than a sensation. I reached for the third drawer. My fingers touched the handle and slipped through it. I tried again, through, a third time, and this time I pressed harder, pressed with the kind of desperate specificity I had used at 3 a.m. in room 412 when the compressions were not working, and I bore down with everything I had because stopping was not something my hands knew how to do. The drawer opened. I reached in. I found the chart, Thomas Delgado's chart. I pulled it out, and I held it against my chest, and I pressed it into my sternum until I could feel the metal clip biting through my shirt and into the skin beneath. And the bite was the most real thing I had felt in minutes, a small, sharp point of pain that said, "You are here. You are solid. You are a body that can be bitten by a metal clip," and I held on. I said his name aloud. Thomas Delgado. I said it again. Thomas Delgado, room 412, March 14th. I was there. I did not leave. I held on. And I opened the chart, and I crossed out what I had written, the clinical closure, the absolution, the letting go, and I wrote over it in letters that pressed through to the page beneath. I am still sorry. I will not stop being sorry. This chart is not complete. This chart will never be complete. I will carry it until I cannot carry anything, and then I will carry it after that. The pen was heavy in my hand. The desk was solid under my elbow. My feet pressed into the floor, and I could feel the texture of the tile through my shoes, not as a concept, as a fact. The chair held my weight. My reflection in the window was dark and solid, and behind it there was nothing. No silhouette, no shape, no tenant waiting in the space I had almost surrendered. The light from the desk lamp hit my hand and stopped there. Stopped the way light stops at skin, at substance, at a body that has decided to remain a body. The grief settled back into me like water filling a vessel. Not warm, not comforting, heavy. The beautiful, brutal, anchoring heaviness of a wound I had chosen not to heal. I put the chart in my bag. I zipped the bag shut. The folder's edge pressed against my palm through the canvas, familiar and specific, and the weight of it settled on my thigh like a hand I had learned not to let go of. I sat in the clinic as the sun finished setting and the shadows pressed against the walls. And this time, when I felt the cold concentrate behind me, the slow rhythm through the cinder block, the pulse that mimicked compressions at the wrong speed, I pressed my hand against the wall, and I whispered, I know what you need, but I can't give it to you, not mine. Mine is spoken for. The cold held. The vibration continued pulsing against my palm, and then it changed. The single concentrated point of cold expanded, spread across the wall in the shape of a silhouette. A head, shoulders, one arm extended, palm flat against the cinder block opposite mine. My shape, my outline, a shadow wearing me on the other side of the wall, pressing its palm to where my palm was, and for one moment the cold was so intense and so precise that I could feel the lines of its hand matching the lines of mine, finger to finger, a handprint made of absence meeting a handprint made of grief. Then it receded. The shape contracted, slid down the wall, and was gone. The cold thinned. The vibration stopped. Through the east-facing window, I watched it rejoin the others in the road, a colony of the unanchored, a community of the separated, moving across the dust in the last light. It had recognized me. It had measured me. And it had decided that tonight I was not ready. The word it did not say, the word I felt in the shape of its retreat, was yet. I drove out of Clarita Basin the next morning at dawn, heading east, the sun in my face, no shadow behind my car. I passed the town sign, white letters on brown wood, population unlisted, and I watched it shrink in the rearview mirror until the road curved and the town was gone. I weighed myself at a gas station in Socorro, 119 pounds, 12 pounds lighter than when I arrived. The number meant something, but not what it would have meant before. It meant that Clarita Basin had taken something from me that I could not name, and could not recover some portion of my substance, my there-ness, my ability to fully interrupt the light. It meant that for the rest of my life, my shadow would be slightly thinner than it should be, slightly more transparent, a permanent record of the weeks I spent in a town where the light was wrong. But I was still here, still heavy enough to hold a chart, still heavy enough to press footprints into the ground, still sorry enough to stay solid. I drove north toward Albuquerque. I did not stop at Presbyterian. I did not need to. Thomas Delgado's chart was in my bag on the passenger seat, and it would be there tomorrow and the day after and every day after that. And its weight would keep me on the ground, and the ground would accept my weight, and my shadow, what was left of it, would fall behind me in the morning light, thin and pale and incomplete, but mine, still mine. I passed a road sign for Albuquerque, 67 miles, and I looked in the rearview mirror one more time. The road behind me was empty. The desert floor was bright and flat and featureless. But far back, at the very edge of where the road met the horizon, there was a shape on the ground. Dark, long, stretched across the asphalt in the early light, oriented toward my car, reaching, not moving, not yet. I pressed the gas. I held the chart. I drove, 12 pounds lighter and still driving, still carrying, still refusing to put it down. And behind me, on a road in New Mexico where nothing casts right, something that used to be part of me lay flat against the earth and waited. Patient, the way only a shadow can be patient, the way something waits that has nowhere else to be, and all the time in the world, and knows with the certainty of light itself, that eventually everyone sets their burden down. Everyone, eventually.